How to narrate combat like a boss, today on Dungeon Craft. Welcome to Dungeon Craft. I'm Professor Dungeon Master, and this channel is about playing the ultimate game of Dungeons & Dragons. Level up your game by subscribing and click the bell icon, and you'll be on your way to adventure. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a video on narrating Dungeons & Dragons in general, and it was pretty popular. Thank you very much for sharing it. It helps grow the channel. And this week, we're going to be concentrating on another similar skill, describing combat. This episode is going to be system agnostic. I'm not going to talk about rules at all. No matter what version of the game you run, whether you're running 5e Pathfinder, Labyrinth Lord, or Lamentations of the Flame Princess, you still need to describe combat. And it's one of the most challenging skills, I think, to master. But if you do it well, it can really level up your game. So the first 3 tips I have for you are read, read, read. And who are you going to read? I'm going to pause for a moment, see if you can read my mind. I'm going to pick an author, a fantasy author, and you're going to tell me who it is if we're on the same wavelength. So here we go. It is, did you say Robert E. Howard? Well, if you did, you get a few extra experience points if you put it in the comment below. Robert E. Howard is the absolute best when it comes to describing just the visceral impact of combat. Everyone loves Tolkien for the world building and the elvish, but he's the kind of guy that spent most of his time in a tweed jacket in a university. Robert Howard actually punched people, and his prose reads like it. Just a couple of lines of Howard's stuff. As he sprang from the wall, his axe dropped an outlaw with a severed shoulder, and the terrible backhand return crushed the skull of another. He was like a tiger as he leaped, sidestepped, and spun, offering an ever-moving target, while his axe wove a shining wheel of death about him. You don't get much more visceral than that. Howard was the absolute best, and you need to read him like I do with a highlighter and highlight those combats. You don't just say you hit, you say you pound, punch, slash, slam, crash, crunch. You don't say, up, the monster missed. You say your arm goes numb as the ogre batters at your shield with his massive club. I think too many Dungeon Masters have their descriptions informed by film. Role-playing games aren't a visual medium like film. To be able to accurately and in an exciting way convey the sense of action, you need to have a very large vocabulary. Some games like Rolemaster and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay accomplish this by having very gory critical hit tables. I'll never forget, you sever your opponent's arm at the shoulder joint. The arm hangs limply, a mass of tattered and pulpy flesh with protruding fragments of bone. By chance, one of those fragments has severed a major artery and your opponent collapses in a spray of blood. That's great stuff, but it means flipping through a book. I have my post-it here for the critical hit tables, and that can slow your game down. Instead, what you want is a chart that can be more versatile like this. Here we have 3 columns, a list of common action verbs, a location, and some extra flavor text. You don't just hit someone, you pound, pierce, and pulverize. You don't just stab someone, you eviscerate, impale, or disembowel them. You don't just hit them for 4 points of damage. They take 4 points of damage to the ear, elbow, or eye socket, to the face, femur, or forearm, or skull, spine, or spleen. Just choose one from each column and you'll come up with, you drive your shield into your opponent's torso, shattering his ribs. You batter his skull with a sickening crunch. You shatter his jaw, spraying teeth everywhere. Just a few details can make a huge impact. A punch to the throat or a kick to the ribs is far better than a hit or a miss. I keep this chart at the back of my Dungeon Master's notebook for easy reference, or you could attach it to a DM screen. You can make a chart like this of your own, or if you want a PDF of mine, it's available to all my patrons on Patreon for as little as $2 a month. That's the price of a side of guacamole, and you get access to this chart and tons of other stuff and what the interior of my Dungeon Master's notebook looks like. Practice it enough and you'll commit it to memory and you won't even need it. Now, you don't have to do this with every strike, but it's really effective for a killing blow. You can also offload this work onto your players and ask them, what does your killing move look like, and have them describe it to you. This gives them a sense of collaboration and they get to feel cool, which is, let's face it, the biggest reason why we play these games. Another narrative technique is to use interesting terrain for your climactic battle. Consider setting that climax on a cliff, or in a room that has a bottomless pit in the center, or in a room where the ceiling is supported by just 2 cracked beams, or in a burning warehouse. Have the terrain play a role, hampering the player characters, perhaps giving them an advantage, but also imposing a time limit. Timer dice will help a lot. Index Card RPG uses a D4, but you could use a D6 or whatever you'd like. And at the beginning of the combat, just toss that die and say, you feel the cliff cracking under your feet, it's going to completely collapse in 3 rounds. Now it's a race against time, and a race against time will always strengthen the narrative of your game. One of the best endings to a game I ever had was a runaway coach slides down on a frozen lake and it cracks and it falls into the lake, and the players have to rescue the passengers, and at the same time the monster attacks, and as they're fighting on the ice is spiderwebbing beneath them. The time or die thing I don't think is a rule in like a combat rule. I think what it is a narrative rule. Every James Bond film uses it. Either at the end there's a ticking bomb or Bond is in a collapsing building. And a growing number of tabletop board games are using this technique as well. Games as diverse as Terraforming Mars, Blood Rage, Dead of Winter, Mysterium, and Forbidden Island all use some sort of timer mechanism to increase the tension. Proof that this strategy is universal and can improve any narrative, including a role-playing game. Being able to narrate combat effectively is an absolutely critical skill for any game master to have, regardless of what system you play. The best way to improve your skill is to constantly practice, so run it at your next session and tell me how it works out in the comments below. I'm including a link to some of Robert E. Howard's writings on Amazon below. Also below are links to Facebook and Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and be sure to share it with the Dungeon Master you love today. And for more great Dungeon Craft tips, check out these videos over here. Once again, for Dungeon Craft, this has been Professor Dungeon Master. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. And until then, may all your rolls be natural 20.